For 4 months, Daisy scrubbed the floors of a mansion that didn't know her name, endured a woman who treated cruelty like a hobby, and kept her head down so perfectly that everyone in that house forgot she had one. That was the mistake. Soo-ah handed her a gala invitation as a punchline, expecting a broken girl in the wrong clothes. And instead, she triggered the one thing her husband had been quietly, patiently, devastatingly waiting for her to do. By the time Daisy walked through those ballroom doors in a gown threaded with 40 years' worth of Kang family diamonds, it wasn't an entrance. It was an execution. And Soo-ah was the only one in the room who didn't know it yet. The alarm went off at 4:47 a.m. Daisy never slept past it. Not because she was eager, because she had learned, the way you learn things that survival teaches you, that being late in this house had a cost she could not afford to pay. She was on her feet before the sound finished, her body moving, as clothing, and started seeing as a second as clothing, and started seeing as a second skin she wore to disappear inside. She checked herself once in the small mirror above the basin. Not vanity, armor. No stray hairs, no creased collar. Nothing Soo-ah could find before 9 o'clock. She thought she understood the rules of this house. She had no idea the game had already started without her. The Kang mansion had 17 rooms on 3 floors. 4 bathrooms with heated floors she was never allowed to use. A kitchen restocked weekly with food she was never offered. And a grand foyer with marble so white it reflected you back at yourself. Small, distorted, kneeling at the base of it with your hands in bleach water at 5 in the morning. Daisy had memorized the order. Foyer first, always. Soo-ah descended the main staircase at exactly 8:15, and she needed the floors mirrored by then. Then the sitting rooms, then the kitchen, then the private halls, where she moved silently, a ghost who had learned to be invisible not just to the people in this house, but to herself. She was scrubbing the lower banister on a Tuesday morning when she felt it. Not a sound. A change in pressure. The particular atmospheric shift that preceded only one thing in this house. She did not look up. She kept her hands moving, but every nerve ending in her body had just gone very, very still. He was there, somewhere behind her, watching. She had figured out Soo-ah in week 1. Ju-won she still hadn't figured out. And that terrified her more than anything else in the mansion. She became aware of him the way you become aware of something dangerous in your peripheral vision. Not by looking, but by the way the air around it changed. He appeared without warning, without sound, in doorways and at the ends of hallways. And he watched her work, with an expression she could never fully read before he was gone again. The first time, she'd nearly knocked over her bucket. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't apologized for startling her. Just watched her with those dark, still eyes for 4 seconds, then turned and walked away without a word. 4 seconds. She had counted. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself a lot of things in that mansion. Most of them were useful fictions. But she noticed, over weeks, a pattern she hadn't been looking for. On the mornings Ju-won was somewhere in the house, Soo-ah's cruelty ran hotter. Louder complaints, more pointed corrections, delivered in rooms where sound carried as though she were performing for an audience that wasn't watching. As though she were desperately reminding someone, or herself, of the hierarchy she'd built. Daisy filed that observation away and kept scrubbing. She was very good at filing things away. What she hadn't filed away yet. What she hadn't let herself think about directly, the way you don't look directly at the sun, was the look on his face the morning he'd found Soo-ah criticizing the way she'd folded the guest towels. He hadn't said anything. He'd just stood in the doorway, and something in his expression had shifted. Barely, invisibly, in a way that most people would have missed entirely. Daisy hadn't missed it. She'd thought about it every day since. She hadn't let herself understand it yet. Everyone said Soo-ah Kang was untouchable. She had power, money, the right last name, and a social network built like a fortress. That's exactly why what she did next destroyed her. Daisy knew the Thursday afternoons. They happened twice a month. 4 women arriving in chauffeured cars, designer handbags, fresh manicures, the particular leisure of people who had never once worried about their next paycheck. They occupied the east sitting room like a territory and spoke loudly about things Daisy was not supposed to be listening to. She made herself scarce on Thursdays. Or tried to. She was in the hallway with a laundry cart when Soo-ah's voice came through the open sitting room door with the specific carrying quality of someone who wants to be overheard. "I've done something wonderfully charitable," Soo-ah was saying. The laughter that followed was the kind that anticipates a punchline. "I've invited our maid to the gala." A beat of silence. Then, "You didn't." "I absolutely did. She was on the floor doing that scrubbing thing, and I thought, why not? Let her see how real people live." More laughter. "She has no idea what she's in for. I'm half expecting her to show up in the uniform." "Which one is this? The new one?" "The black one." Daisy. Very earnest. Very... A pause containing a private smile Daisy could hear without seeing. Committed to her role. Someone said, "You are terrible, Soo-ah." The way she said it made clear she meant it as a compliment. "I told her black tie required. I wrote it on the invitation. I dropped it in her bucket while she was using it." A cascade of laughter at that detail. The waterlogged gold foil, the earnest maid fishing her invitation from the soapy water. "Let her figure out what to wear. It'll be the most entertainment we've had at one of these things in years." Daisy finished folding the sheet in her hands. She placed it on the cart. She pushed the cart to the linen closet at the exact pace she always moved, put each sheet away in the exact order she always used, and then stood in the small dark closet with her back against the shelf and her eyes on the ceiling. 30 seconds. She gave herself 30 seconds. Then she went back to work. She was halfway down the back corridor when she felt that pressure change again. She didn't turn. She already knew. Ju-won was standing at the junction of the hallway. 20 feet behind her, close enough to the sitting room door that he had almost certainly heard every word his wife had just said. When she allowed herself a brief glance, his face was unreadable, but his hands. She noticed his hands. They were very still at his sides. Too still. The stillness of a man exerting significant effort to keep them that way. He looked at her for 3 seconds, then at the sitting room door. Then he put his phone in his jacket pocket and walked in the opposite direction. She watched the empty hallway where he'd been. And for the first time in 4 months, something shifted in the back of her mind. A thought she didn't have language for yet, but that felt like the first tremor before an earthquake. She picked up her cart. There was still a whole floor left to clean. 3 weeks ago, he wouldn't look at her in a room where his wife was present. Now she understood he'd been looking at her the entire time, just making sure no one else saw him do it. She found it at 7:15 that evening. The room was exactly as she'd left it. The thin quilt, pulled tight. The single lamp on the desk. The textbook window showing the drainage pipe and a strip of Seoul night sky. Except for the box. It sat in the center of her bed like it owned the room. Black velvet, enormous. The kind of object that changes the atmosphere of a space simply by existing inside it. Tied with a single black ribbon, no card visible from the doorway. Daisy stood in the door for a long moment. She looked down the hall. Empty. She crossed the room slowly, the way you approach something you suspect might be a trap, and stood over it. The velvet was so dense it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. She untied the ribbon. She lifted the lid. The air left her body. The dress inside was the deep black of a night sky between stars. And it was... She had no word that was big enough. It caught the dim light of her lamp and gave it back multiplied, fractured into 1,000 directions, because every surface of the fabric was threaded with something that was not sequins, not beading, not any embellishment she had a name for. Thousands of diamonds, crushed and set, woven into the gown structure the way thread is woven into silk. Not sewn on, not glued, integral, part of it. It was not a dress with diamonds. It was diamonds, shaped into a dress. There was a card. Small, matte black, tucked at the base of the lid. The handwriting was precise and minimal. The pen strokes of a man who chose his words with the same economy he chose everything. Wear it for me. J. She read it twice. She set it on the desk. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the dress for a long time, not touching it. The sounds of the house moved around her. The television murmuring from the main living room, the scrape of a chair somewhere above. The ordinary percussion of a household that had no idea what was sitting in its smallest room. She thought about the invitation floating in the soapy bucket. She thought about Soo-ah's voice. It'll be the most entertainment we've had in years. She thought about Ju-won's hands, how still they'd been. She closed the box, turned off the lamp, lay on her bed in the dark with the velvet box pressed against her side like a question she hadn't answered yet. In the Korean underworld, gifting a woman the family jewels has a meaning that goes far beyond romance. It's a declaration of succession. She made one decision that Friday. She wasn't going. She made a different decision Saturday morning, and that one was the one that changed everything. On Friday, she put the box under her bed and went to work, and told herself the answer was no. The whole situation was dangerous in ways she could feel, but not yet name. She did not know what Ju-won wanted. She did not know what wearing that dress would mean inside a world she was only beginning to understand the edges of. She had worked too hard and survived too much to walk into a room she didn't understand, carrying a debt she hadn't consented to. She scrubbed the foyer. She kept her head down. She told herself no. Saturday morning, she took the box back out. She set it on the desk. She told herself she was just looking. She'd spent 4 months making herself smaller. Hair tucked under a headscarf, not because she had to, but because it made her less visible. Voice at a low, careful register. Gray uniform worn an inch longer than the hem required, because the extra fabric felt like coverage. She had packed herself into the smallest possible version of herself, and she had gotten so good at it that she'd nearly forgotten what the full-size version looked like. She opened the box. She picked the dress up. It was heavier than it looked. That weight made it feel real in a way the whole situation hadn't quite felt real yet. She carried it the 4 steps to the small mirror and held it up in front of herself, and the lamplight hit the diamonds and the room exploded. Softly. 1,000 small points of light scattering across the walls and the ceiling and her own reflected face. She stood very still. She looked at herself. Really looked. For the first time in 4 months. The woman in the mirror was not the woman Soo-ah stepped over with the phone pressed to her ear. She was not the shadow that moved through the upstairs hall at 6 in the morning. She was tall and angular and precise, high cheekbones and a jaw that could cut glass, skin so rich and dark it made the diamond light look like it had been designed specifically to fall on her. She had been hiding a face like that under a headscarf in a house that didn't deserve it. Her mother used to say, "Baby, small doesn't protect you. It just makes you easier to miss." Daisy looked at the dress. She looked at the mirror. She looked at herself. She put it on. The fabric settled against her body like it had been made for exactly this, which, she would later learn, it had. The hem grazed the floor, at a precise 1/2 inch. The bodice fit without a single pin's width of give. The structured back held her posture in a way that made slumping feel physically impossible. Standing in it, she was not the same woman. Standing in it, She was not a woman who scrubbed floors. She took her hair down, slowly, section by section, until it was full and out and hers again. Found in the bottom of her bag a lipstick she hadn't worn since before this job. Deep burgundy, the color of a dare. She put it on with a steady hand. Didn't look at the mirror until she was finished. When she did, she exhaled a breath that felt 4 months long. She tucked the small matte card into the hidden seam pocket on the gown's hip. Straightened all the way, spine long, shoulders squared, chin level. Walked to the door. The servants' corridor was narrow and fluorescent lit, and smelled faintly of cleaning solution. Tonight, a queen walked through it on her way to the car. Soo-ah had spent 3 years building her throne in that ballroom. She was so busy enjoying it that she never noticed her husband had already decided to hand it to someone else. The Grand Seoul ballroom had 3 stories of glass and marble, chandeliers cascading from the vaulted ceiling like frozen waterfalls of light, round tables set with china so thin you could see your hand through it. The Syndicate Charity Gala required a personal invitation and a verified net worth to enter, which meant that by 9 o'clock on Saturday night, the room contained more money, more danger, and more carefully maintained social performance per square foot than almost anywhere else in Seoul. Soo-ah had been there since 8. Silver gown, hair up, jewelry immaculate, moving through the room like she'd choreographed it, because she had, in every way that mattered. 3 years as the effective hostess of this event. She knew every alliance and tension in the room, every seating arrangement and its political weight. This was her element. 20 minutes. Unusual. He didn't drink at these events, and he wasn't drinking now. Just standing with a glass of water gone warm in his hand, watching the room with that expression he always wore in crowds. Patient, still, impossible to read. He hadn't spoken to Soo-ah since they'd arrived. She preferred it that way. He had a talent for making her feel watched. 9:23. The gala had found its rhythm. First course cleared, orchestra cycling, conversations humming at every table. Soo-ah had made her rounds. She had accepted every compliment on her dress, her event, her general magnificence. She kept checking the doors. It would be fine either way, she told herself. If the girl didn't show, increasingly likely, a maid with no business being here would come to her senses. That was its own humiliation. The RSVP would be the joke. And if she did show up, well, that would be better. She refilled her champagne, turned to Mina with a fresh smile. Decided she was not checking the doors anymore. Too above it. Too good an evening to... The orchestra stopped playing. Not a gradual unwinding. Not the pause between movements. It stopped mid-phrase. The way music stops when something breaks the conductor's concentration. One moment the ballroom was full of it. Then it was not. And the silence that followed was the kind that turns heads. First one, then another, rippling outward from the entrance until the entire room had turned. Soo-ah's champagne flute stopped halfway to her mouth. Mina had gone very still. Yeonji, who had a clearer sightline to the entrance, said nothing. But her expression did something Soo-ah had never seen on it before. Soo-ah turned to look. The champagne glass lowered itself back to the table. The doors had opened dozens of times that night for crime lords and billionaires. None of them stopped the music. She did. The mahogany doors were 12 feet tall, hand-carved, requiring 2 staff members to open simultaneously. They had swung wide all evening for the most powerful people in Seoul, and each time the room had barely noticed. This time, the room noticed. It started with the light. Before anyone had fully registered the doors opening, the chandeliers, 3,000 hand-set crystals each, seemed to tilt. Not physically. But the light in the room shifted, redirected, pulled toward the entrance the way all light is pulled toward whatever it recognizes as its own. And then, Daisy stepped through. She did not pause. She walked in the way water moves, without hesitation, without performance, with the serene inevitability of something following its natural course. Head up, spine straight, shoulders back in the way the dress demanded, the way she understood she had always been meant to hold them. Her hair was down and full, and catching the light the same way the gown caught it. Generously, abundantly, as though light itself could not help but be drawn to her. The dress did not sparkle. Sparkling was for department stores. The $3 million gown did something quieter and more devastating. It refracted. Every diamond broke the chandelier light apart into its constituent colors and scattered them in all directions. As Daisy moved, the room moved with her. Thousands of small points of light slid across the walls, the ceiling, the faces of the 500 people who had stopped everything they were doing to watch. She was not wearing a dress. She was wearing captured light, poured into the shape of a woman. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. In a room of 500 people, that is a very long time. The crowd parted. Not deliberately, with the organic, involuntary yielding of a crowd that has collectively forgotten to hold its ground. Men who controlled shipping lanes and judicial appointments moved aside. Women who had spent their adult lives perfecting social weaponry found, for one disorienting moment, that they had no ammunition loaded for this. At the champagne table, Soo-ah had not moved. Her flute was still hovering where she'd lowered it 30 seconds ago. Her mouth was slightly open. Her face, arranged all evening into the comfortable architecture of a woman entirely in control, had come undone in a way that was quiet but total. Not broken yet, but irreversibly compromised. Mina said, "Soo-ah." Soo-ah didn't answer. Across the room, Ju-won had not turned around. Still at the bar, still facing the far wall, glass of warm water in his hand. But the set of his jaw had changed. And something in the line of his shoulders, a very slight, very deliberate release of tension, looked to anyone paying close enough attention, exactly like satisfaction. He had been waiting for this moment for a long time. She had spent 3 years managing every variable in that room. The one variable she'd never thought to account for was her husband already being 10 moves ahead of her. It took Soo-ah 60 seconds to recover. 60 seconds to reassemble the architecture of her face, to run what she was seeing through the refinery of her mind that converted every threat, every surprise, everything that frightened her, into anger. Anger was safe. Anger was a direction. Anger was the only tool she had left that felt like control. She set down her champagne. She crossed the room. Fast. Wrong. A woman of her social precision never moved fast. Fast was undignified. Fast was already losing. But she couldn't stop herself. The architecture of her evening was collapsing in real time, and her body's only instruction was to move toward the collapse and stop it. The crowd that had parted for Daisy did not part as readily for Soo-ah. They stepped aside slowly, watching, because from 30 feet away, they could already sense that what was coming was the kind of thing you position yourself to witness. "What?" Soo-ah said, close enough now. "Are you wearing?" Not a question. Her voice was low and controlled in the specific way of things that are very close to not being controlled. Her eyes moved over the dress in a rapid clinical scan, cataloging, calculating, and what she found in that calculation drained the remaining color from her face. Daisy looked at her calmly. "You said black tie required." The composure of it, the absolute breathtaking stillness, lit something in Soo-ah's chest that she could not contain. She grabbed Daisy's arm. Public. Deliberate. The grip of a woman staking a claim. "That dress is from this family's collection. I don't know how you got into the vault. I don't know who helped you. But what you have done is theft." She turned to the crowd. projecting. "This is our maid. She works in my house. She has no money. She stole this dress." The accusation hit the room like a stone in still water. Whispers, shifted glances, the careful recalibration of people who made their livings reading situations and choosing sides. Daisy did not pull her arm away. She stood completely still. The power of a woman who does not move because she does not need to, because she knows something the room doesn't know yet, and she is willing to wait for it. "Someone call security. This woman is a thief." Two of Soo-ah's security staff appeared from the periphery, moving toward Daisy with the professional efficiency of men paid not to ask questions. "Soo-ah." One word, spoken at conversational volume, from somewhere behind the crowd. Every person in the immediate radius heard it. Because the voice that said it was the kind of voice that rooms organize themselves around. Not loud, not theatrical. Just completely, irreversibly authoritative. The security staff stopped moving. Winning in this room wasn't about who yelled loudest, it was about who walked slowest. And Ju-won had never walked faster than he needed to in his life. The crowd parted for Ju-won the way it had parted for Daisy. Not as deliberate courtesy but as physical reflex, the involuntary clearing of a path for something the body recognizes as significant before the mind catches up. He walked slowly, the pace of a man who understood that speed signals urgency, and urgency signals vulnerability, and he had not been vulnerable in a very long time. Charcoal suit so dark it was almost black. No tie. Top button open. On anyone else careless. On him a deliberate refusal to perform formality for anyone in the room. His face caught nothing, gave nothing, remained the sealed room it always was. He stepped between Daisy and his wife. Simply, without drama. He repositioned his body so that it occupied the space between them, and suddenly Soo-ah's outstretched hand was pointed at his chest instead of Daisy's arm, and the security staff were facing him instead of her. And the entire geometry of the confrontation had shifted. Soo-ah didn't understand what had happened at first. Her hand hung in the air, her mouth opened and closed. She looked at her husband's back with an expression that cycled rapidly. Confusion, recognition, something that might have been fear, before landing on the only register she had left. "What are you doing? Move. She stole from us. She needs to be removed." Ju-won did not move. He half turned, not to face his wife, but to look at Daisy. The way he always looked at her. That heavy, unreadable attention that was somehow both a shield and an admission. His eyes moved over her face once, slowly. Then he turned back to the room. He held out his hand. Not to his wife, to Daisy. 500 people stopped making noise simultaneously. The sudden silence had a physical weight to it. Even the kitchen staff visible through the service door at the far end had gone still. Daisy looked at the hand, looked at his face. He was watching the room, not her, giving her a choice, not an instruction. That, more than anything else, was what decided her. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with a precision that was, to everyone watching, unmistakably deliberate. Not a gentleman's courtesy, not an employer's gesture, a claim, made publicly, made calmly, made in a room full of people who would carry the image of it for the rest of their professional lives. Soo-ah made a sound that was not quite a word. She thought he was going to defend her. She had no idea he was about to dismantle his entire marriage in front of the most dangerous room in Seoul, and that he'd been planning it for months. A young gala staff member handed Ju-won the microphone when he extended his free hand for it. The gesture so unhurried, so unambiguous in its expectation of compliance, that the boy handed it over before consciously deciding to. Ju-won did not tap it or clear his throat or ask for attention. He already had it. "The dress," he said, his voice filling the room through the house speakers with a quietness that somehow achieved volume, "is not stolen. A pause. He let that land. Let the room decide what to do with it before he continued. I commissioned it 8 weeks ago from a couturier in Seongsu. The diamonds are from the Kang family estate, from the vault that my wife does not have access to, because I have never given her the combination. The room absorbed that sentence. People who understood what it meant exchanged glances. People who didn't understand it watched the ones who did. I had it delivered to the woman I intended to wear it. That woman is standing beside me. That is not theft. That is a gift. And it is none of your business. He turned to his wife. Soo-ah had backed up 2 steps without appearing to realize it. The silver dress that had looked magnificent an hour ago now looked like a costume, flashy, effortful, and slightly desperate beside the quiet devastation of the woman standing next to her husband. You invited her here? Ju-won said, his voice stripped of its public register now, personal and precisely aimed. To humiliate her. You dropped her invitation in her cleaning bucket. You told your friends it would be entertainment. You have done this every day for 4 months. A pause in which 500 people understood that the ledger of this marriage was being read aloud and the numbers were catastrophic. I have watched you do it. Ju-won, Soo-ah began. Kim. He didn't look away from his wife. Mrs. Kang's access to the residence is suspended as of tonight. Her accounts as well. Legal will handle the rest. Kim, who had worked for Ju-won for 11 years and knew that when he used that register, calm, final, unhurried, there was no version in which the instruction got walked back, said, Yes, sir. Soo-ah looked at Kim, looked at the security staff who had been moving toward Daisy 2 minutes ago and were now oriented, in their subtle professional posture, toward her. She looked at Mina, who had taken a careful step backward, at Yeonji, whose expression had closed like a shutter, at dozens of faces she had managed and cultivated for 3 years, all of them now doing the practiced social calculation of a crowd, deciding which side of a line to stand on. They had already decided. That was the thing about the underworld's social ecosystem that Soo-ah had spent years mastering and apparently never understood. It ran on power. And power in this room had just changed hands. Ju-won returned to the microphone. His voice went public again, and what he said next moved through the room like a current through water, invisible but total. I'll be filing for divorce in the morning. I'm telling you tonight because in this room, that means something. It means she no longer speaks for this family. It means the arrangements some of you have been running through her are void. If you have questions, speak to my lawyer. Tonight, I'm otherwise engaged. He handed the microphone back, looked down at Daisy's hand in his, and for the first time all evening, for the first time she had ever witnessed, the sealed room of his face opened. Not a smile, exactly. The architecture of one. The place a smile begins, restrained by habit but not, this time, entirely contained. Behind them, Soo-ah made a sound like something breaking. She had walked into that ballroom as the woman they invited to laugh at. She left it as the woman they would never forget. They escorted Soo-ah out through the service entrance. This was Kim's decision, and it was, all things considered, a kind one. The main doors would have required her to pass the entire room again, to walk through 500 witnesses in full understanding of what she was walking away from. The service corridor was narrow and fluorescent lit, and smelled of kitchen steam, and it was exactly the kind of corridor that Daisy had walked through every day for 4 months, and whether or not Kim understood the symmetry of that, the symmetry was there. Soo-ah did not go quietly. The sounds of it, the first shocked protest, the escalating desperation, something that might have been weeping, carried briefly from behind the service door before the corridor swallowed it. Around the ballroom, Conversations resumed with the careful buzzing energy of people processing something that would be discussed for years. Phones appeared. Glasses were refilled. The orchestra, after a long pause, began to play again. Something slow and deliberate, as though the musicians had collectively understood that the tempo of the room had fundamentally changed. Daisy stood in the center of the ballroom floor, still holding his hand. The diamonds in her dress continued their quiet work, catching light, fracturing it, scattering it across the faces of the people watching. A woman near the front smiled at her. Not the thin smile of social performance. Something genuine. Something that recognized the survival of a difficult thing and chose to acknowledge it. Daisy nodded back. Ju-won returned to her side. When he turned to face her, the room fell away. In the way rooms fall away when the person in front of you takes up the full width of your attention. He looked at her. Just looked. The way he'd been looking at her for 4 months across marble floors and laundry carts and the steam rising from cleaning buckets. Except now there was nothing between the looking and her, and he didn't have to pretend it was anything other than what it was. "You came," he said. "You asked," she said. Something moved across his face, brief, unguarded, quickly settled into that characteristic stillness. He held out his hand again, differently this time. Not a claim, an invitation. She took it. He led her onto the dance floor. The orchestra shifted without instruction into something warmer, and the people at the edges moved back, not out of deference, but out of the instinctive human recognition that some moments are private even when they happen in public. He danced well. She hadn't expected that. He moved the way he did everything, with economy and precision, no wasted motion, leading without force. One hand at her waist, warm through the diamond fabric, the other holding hers. He leaned in close enough to be heard without being heard by anyone else, and spoke in the low, unhurried voice he used when he wasn't performing anything for anyone. "You are never going to scrub another floor," he said. "Not in that house, not anywhere. Do you understand me?" Daisy looked at him. At the face she had studied in peripheral vision for 4 months, learning it in stolen glances the way you learn something you've been told not to look at directly. Up close, it was sharper, more tired, more human than the mask he wore everywhere else. "I heard you," she said carefully. "I didn't say I understood." A pause. Then, and she would replay this moment in the quiet of whatever room she woke up in from now on. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, the architecture of one. The place a smile begins, restrained by habit, but not this time entirely contained. "You will," he said. They kept dancing. Around them, the Grand Seoul ballroom reconstructed itself into something resembling its former evening. Glasses raised, conversations resumed, the orchestra working through its slow and altered repertoire. But the room was not the same room it had been an hour ago. Everyone in it knew it. A ledger had been settled. A hierarchy had shifted. The woman who had run this social world for 3 years had been walked out through the kitchen, and the woman in the diamond dress was on the dance floor with the most dangerous man in Seoul, and his hand was at her waist, and neither of them was going anywhere. In the servants' quarters of the Kang mansion, a gray uniform hung on the back of a chair beside a narrow bed. The window above the basin showed the drainage pipe and a strip of night sky. The lamp on the desk was off. In the morning, no one would come to collect it. Daisy's story inside the Korean underworld is, if just beginning. What happens when the syndicate families test whether the new queen is truly worthy of the Kang seat, and whether she can survive a world she was never supposed to enter? Coming soon. If you have ever been underestimated, overlooked, or treated like you were invisible, this story is for you. Daisy walked into that mansion as a maid, but she walked out as a queen. Because true dignity doesn't come from a uniform, and it certainly doesn't come from the people who try to break you. Drop a crown in the comments if you believe karma never misses an address. And please, let me know what city or country you're watching from. I want to say a personal hello to the amazing people building this storyverse with me. Hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next chapter.